Welcome to the Marketplace Midland podcast, where we highlight a monthly speaker that shares helpful tools for all of us to integrate timeless biblical principles into our modern business.
I can't thank you enough for joining us for this last Marketplace of 2025. As Ken mentioned earlier, we get to hear from a local legend today, but I'll let you read about his bio for those of you guys that don't know Blake. But I want to tell you some highlights, and then I really want to hone in on a specific aspect of ministry in general. So for about 30 years, I've been involved with a ministry called Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And the whole thrust of that ministry is to change the world through the influence of athletes and coaches. And I can't think of a better poster child for long-term community impact in all of the places that he's been than Blake Johnston. You see, this guy had coaches in his life that discipled him, probably unknowingly at the time would be my guess. And then many of you have walked alongside of him and discipled him. A guy that's a good friend of all of ours, Bobby Henry, being one of those, who, by the way, is in the hospital today. You guys be praying for Bobby for his lung health to kind of restore and for him to get back in the fight. And I know he's fighting while he's in the hospital, telling people about Jesus. But Blake is a poster child for the arc of discipleship. And he's going to share with us today a part of that arc, but he's here because the arc works. You tracking with me? You see, some guy loved Blake enough to tell him about Jesus, and then told him how to follow Jesus and walked with him as he was learning how to follow Jesus, and then turned Blake loose and then spot checked that it was going okay. And God continued to put these men in his life so that it would change the trajectory of his life, of the life of his family, so that guys like us can hear from him about the legitimacy of the transforming power of Jesus Christ. And so a couple highlights about my friend Blake. He's a baller. Am I allowed to use that terminology in a group of brothers? Blake is a baller, okay? Blake's not just a basketball player. Blake is a bona fide baller. And I don't want to be on the court with the guy, even in his 40s, right? Just complete trash of an old fat guy like me, right? Was on a series of winning teams with Midland High, went to OU, played basketball, was an impact guy, not a headliner guy. And that's really a theme of Blake's life that I don't want you to miss today, is that he plays an impact role in the places God sends him. Blake's an entrepreneur. Like a lot of us in the room, took a risk early on in life, probably when he shouldn't have, by all counsel. And he's going to tell you some parts of that part of his story. Blake's a philanthropist. You know, Blake's one of the visionaries around this Midland Athletics Syndicate we have on the west side of town that's going to bring people into our community, keep people in our community, and facilitate our ability as community members to affect families for good. Blake's a room changer. And you guys are going to hear about how his room got changed and how he began to change the room over the thrust of his life today. But last and certainly not least, he's an influencer in the most genuine sense of the word. Not this pseudo-influencer nonsense that we see online. This guy's a real influencer. So you guys give it up for my buddy, my brother, and for the baller from Midland, Texas, Blake Johnston.
Thank you. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. Oh man. All right, I'm already struggling with how to navigate ahead from such a good intro there, Jared. Thank you. I appreciate that. Hey, real quick before we get going, I want to take just a quick second. I would love to acknowledge the leaders of Marketplace Midland. Jared just said this. You guys hear me okay? Everything good in the back? Okay. Up a little bit? Okay. As Jared said, we're at the end of 11 years of this ministry and this organization serving our community. So I'd love if you guys would just join me in a quick applause to the leadership of Marketplace. That's a really big deal. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. It's a blessing to our community. All right, well, I'm honored to be here. I think I'm mostly humbled to be here. A lot of faces in the crowd I don't know, but a lot of faces I know really well, and a bunch of men in this room that I have a lot of respect and admiration for. So I'm honored, but I'm mostly humbled, and I want to thank, I can't say everybody by name, but there's a lot of men in this room that have been praying for me and over today, and other men that have been doing that aren't here. So I want to thank you guys, and despite this claim of me being a baller, I really tried to just humble myself at God's feet and ask Him what I needed to share today. Just kind of surrender to His wisdom and say, He knew every person in this seat today, and I've just been asking Him for 3 or 4 months, and Kyle asked me to speak, what He wanted me to share. So I hope I'm going to lean into that. I'm going to start with it's a lightly funny story, but I visited with a friend of mine who doesn't live here. I was talking to him about Marketplace and telling him I was going to speak. And I said, man, you got any thoughts or advice or input? And he kind of smiled. He said, yeah, Proverbs 17:28. And I was like, all right, I didn't know that off the top of my head. Let me read this to you guys real quick. Even fools are thought wise when they keep silent. With their mouths shut, they seem intelligent. So we started laughing. It was hilarious. I appreciated that. We all need friends like that that'll love us and encourage us and harass us a little bit. So I hope I get to use that at some point. I thought that was pretty clever, and I hope I get to use that on somebody. So I'll lean into God and hope, probably despite my foolishness, maybe God will speak well today. So as I've leaned in and started praying the last 3 or 4 months, God's kind of directed me to this 2-part message. And I'll hustle a little bit because I don't want to take too long, but the first part, I want to share a little bit about my story and some things that have gone on and just God's presence along my journey. And then I want to transition into kind of this second part and talk to you guys about some things that God revealed to me about 2 years ago. Some really interesting principles and revealing some misbeliefs that I had. And I've been on this journey the last 1.5 years, 20 months, assessing that in my life and talking to a lot of guys about these principles. And I don't mean to put like a cliffhanger out there, but I'll come back to it. But I want to dive into that. So I'm happy to share some of my testimony, and I hope that'll point to God. But I absolutely want to get to this point where we dive in and talk some very specific things that I hope will be most applicable. So with that, like you guys have seen, I'm a born and raised Midlander. The oil and gas industry got my family here in the late 70s. I was really blessed to have a family. We were tight. My family went to church. So I grew up in kind of those elementary years of learning who God was and who Jesus was and the good news. So very, very blessed with that. I had a very dynamic event happen at age 12. My family was headed to Abilene on a July afternoon. My mom was driving. My dad was in the passenger seat. My brother and I were in the middle of, it was a pretty sweet, like early 90s minivan. I don't remember the make or model, but it was sexy for sure. So we're driving. We're about 20 minutes outside of Abilene, and an older gentleman switches lanes into us, accidentally runs us off the road. The car goes down in the median. We lose control and starts rolling into the westbound lanes. Car rolled 3.5 times, comes to rest on its side, sliding door open. Sliding door is actually ripped off in the midst of the wreck. The first image I see, I'm 12 years old, the first image I see, my dad is in the front passenger seat, kind of hung to the side, caught in his seatbelt, not moving. Blood was kind of streaming from his head. I'm yelling at him, unresponsive. Didn't understand his state, but it certainly didn't look good. I see out the front windshield, so the car's on its side. I see out the front windshield some boots running toward the car. And thankfully, we didn't collide into oncoming traffic, but we're on I-20. We're in the westbound lanes now, even though we were headed east. And I see these boots running. This guy pulls me out of the top of the sliding door. The next thing I see is my 16-year-old brother on the shoulder of the westbound traffic. A witness later confirmed they saw my brother get ejected from the car, and he actually slid across the lanes of traffic. And so as this truck driver pulls me out, my mom had gotten out of the vehicle, walked over to my brother, and my brother was in terrible shape. He was bloody from head to toe. He was hardly conscious. It was an unreal scene. So there I am at 12 years old, sitting on I-20. Our car's wrecked and totaled. My dad is still in the vehicle. Our stuff is scattered all over I-20, and you just like process this reality that life has literally and figuratively wrecked. And so, traffic starts building up and people start coming to help, and an ambulance finally gets there. They load us up, me and my brother and my mom. They drive us to Abilene. We leave my dad behind, which, was really challenging and confusing. But we hustle on to Abilene, and they get there and they rush my brother off. Like it was life and death. And so they rush him off. My mom and I are kind of there, like checking in and just trying to my mom was in a state of shock. And an hour or two, they came in and told me and my mom that my dad had passed. He was killed on impact. And so, at 12, that's as best I can imagine, that's about the worst thing you could hear. That scene I saw, in the vehicle as it stopped rolling, that it all, that it all come to head. And so they shared that news and they left. And then I'm wrestling with is my 16-year-old brother going to be all right? And I will say, thankfully, after a day or two, he turned a corner and kind of moved towards some healing and some progress. So, a lot of you guys were in our lives. I see men around here that were in our lives and friends of my dad and friends of my family. As tragic event as that was, I will adamantly speak to God's faithfulness and His goodness in my family's life following that, the days and weeks and months and years. I'll just say it, God He pursued my family in a way that I'm really grateful for. And I didn't even understand it that well. As a teenager, we're fairly dumb with most things as teenage guys. But I just saw God's faithfulness. He put me and my brother on solid ground and just guided us ahead. He gave my mom strength to raise two teenage boys after losing her husband. And I'm really grateful. As tragic an event as that was, I've gotten to experience God's faithfulness and goodness in a tragedy. And it's real. So I'm a fast forward. So I get into high school. I was a good athlete. I played varsity baseball and basketball. Actually, I wasn't sure. I knew I wanted to play college athletics. I like baseball and basketball equally well, and I thought, man, I want to try to play one of these two things in college. Well, my sophomore year, I ended up on this amazing basketball team, and I know some of you guys were here and got to see that team. This is sneaky. So we're in Midland, Texas. We ended up having 4 Division I basketball players on that team. It's unheard of. It just doesn't happen in this region. We were 37-1 that year. I got to clarify this because if you fact check this, the actual record shows 36-2. Our last district game, we're blowing out Permian, and we put this dude in from the end of the bench. He plays 2 minutes. He trips over the half-court line, and we find out the next day he had failed a class and was ineligible. So we had to forfeit that game, but by God, we were 37-1. So I'll give you guys a smidge of context of how good this team was. We are at the state tournament in Austin, drum at UT. The state semifinal game, we beat this team from Houston 80-48. Some random dudes from Midland, Texas come in there and beat this Houston team 80-48. At halftime of the state championship game, we are winning 40-14. I mean, Austin is just what is going on? Where is Midland? So a uniquely good team, a great coach, great program. So I played well in the state tournament. That opened the door for my recruitment. And so I started getting recruited from, schools all over the country. I was surprised, but excited. And so that journey kind of presses ahead. I kind of honed that down my junior and senior year to some core schools in the Big 12. I kind of felt like I wanted to stay around here. So a lot of people don't know this. I strongly considered going to Texas, University of Texas, strongly considered it. Rick Barnes was the head coach there at that time. He's now at Tennessee. I really like Coach Barnes and his staff. I'm strongly considering Texas. There were like a trending program, and I'm wrestling through this. What should I do? And I hear God say, if you got to understand this, if you go to Texas, it's going to make it really hard for you to get into heaven. Partly true story. No, I'm all right. I'm sorry. I know you. Let me pause. That did not happen. I did really consider Texas. That I'm taking a shot at my fellow friendly Longhorns. I'm sorry, guys. Y'all don't deserve that. Most of you don't deserve that. So I took a more redneck route. I went to Oklahoma. They didn't even require you to wear shoes there. So I went to OU, and Coach Sampson recruited me. He's now the head coach at Houston. He's been one of the winningest coaches. So step into a really good situation. It was ascending. The program was on the rise. As you guys may have read in the bio, we played in 3 NCAA tournaments. We won 3 Big 12 tournament championships. We played in a Final Four in Atlanta in 2002. We played in an Elite 8 in 2003 in New York. Some of you guys know this, but we were a 1 seed. So, whether you know a lot about basketball or not, when you're a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament, you're one of the 4 best teams in the country. So we were a 1 seed the year, and we end up, and I'm still trying to figure out who let this happen. We play in Syracuse in New York. And they had this young guy, I don't ever remember what happened to him, named Carmelo Anthony. It was an 18-year-old version of Carmelo Anthony. So the season came to an end. Syracuse was a machine, and so we lost that year. But I'll just summarize it like this. Amazing college journey. Lot of adversity, lot of challenge, lot of failure, lot of growing, lot of maturing, but got to experience some really cool things. Played all over the country. Played on national television countless times, played in venues from California to Madison Square Garden to the Georgia Dome, Atlanta. Just some really cool experiences that as a young athlete, it was a blessing to get to experience. So I'm going to go a quick pause, and I want to lay back my faith over this deal. I would say that my high school and college years, I would describe my faith as medium. And I've got 3 teenage kids, and so some of you guys that maybe have teenage kids, my kids say mid now. Like, that's kind of a cool term. Like, it's mid. So I would describe my faith as mid. God, I was baptized at 15. I knew God. I believed in these truths, but I use a sports analogy. I would say, like, God was on my team. He was just a sub. He was a sub. So we were on the same team, and if things got bad, I would sub him in. But he really wasn't the center of my team, and wasn't certainly the center of my life. And so I get to the end of my time at OU, and I'm in my apartment one day. I live with 2 baseball players, friends of mine. So I'm there by myself, and I'm in this apartment, and it's going to sound weird. The apartment went black. I'm sure it literally didn't go black, but the whole thing just went dark. Eerie feeling. I never experienced anything like that before. And I'm thinking, man, what's going on? I felt lost, scared. And then I heard God's voice like I had never heard it before. In the darkness of this apartment, He said, it's time. And man, I didn't know what that meant, but I knew what that meant. He said, it's time. He said, it's time that you understand that you've been created for a purpose for the kingdom. It's time that you understand that you start living in a way with me in the center of everything you're doing. And so He started to guide me through this journey. And man, so grateful that to be pursued like that, and to be covered in grace where, I checked a lot of boxes and people identified me as a Christian, but I knew and He knew, like He was just on the side. He wasn't in the center of everything I was doing. So He began to teach me and reveal that, and it was amazing. I met this young lady that eventually became my wife, and really, talk about miracles. I somehow convinced her to marry me, which took a lot of convincing, and then I convinced her to move to Midland. She's from East Texas, and I was like, hey, there's this great, bizarre place called Midland, Texas, and I think we need to move there and start life and career there. And so she agreed. So we came here kind of late 2004, beginning of 2005. And I had no clue what I was going to do for a career. The oil and gas industry was really not rocking at that point. It was just starting to gain some steam. So family friend of ours talks me into going to work for this commercial insurance agency. I didn't know what that was. I was just like, man, so you're going to pay me like a salary thing? Yeah, it sounds good. I was young and naive. And so they say, yeah. So I go to work there. And within a year and a half, God starts to reveal this plan that a guy I was working with, he started to speak this plan. We were supposed to leave and start an agency ourselves. Now, to Jared's point, and I'm a pretty practical guy, like I'm in this business a year and a half. I'm 24 years old. I think through this lens, if that was my son in that scenario, I'd be like, son, this is a terrible idea. There's about 30 reasons why you shouldn't do this, but God just opened the door, ushered us ahead, and so in 2006, we left and started this agency. Trying to name the agency, and we didn't want to use our last names. That's pretty common in the insurance world, and in a lot of ventures and businesses, but we just decided we didn't want to use our name. And we wanted the name to point to the kingdom, to God, to Jesus. So I was kind of leaning towards, I was like, let's just go for it and go like Jesus Christ Insurance Agency. Like that's catchy. But then we're like, well, that's probably misguided, and we probably couldn't hold to that standard. So we backed off of that, pivoted a little bit, and then we kind of started this journey of some cornerstone references, and then we eventually got to, this reference of Christ as the capstone. And so Psalm 118 refers to Christ as the capstone. So that's how Capstone came to be in 2006. So we put God in the center of what we were doing. My business partner's just a intentional, devout Christ follower, and we just put God in the middle of what we're doing and started this venture. And we grew it and built it for 18 years, and God was so faithful and protected us and provided for us and blessed us and led us in so many ways that we saw and so many ways that we didn't see. And so last year, October 2024, we sold that agency to this international firm. We're now still working there, and it's been a really blessed career journey. Plenty of ups and downs, failures and successes. I think we can all attest, that's just a part of our life. But grateful for God's provision through that and His guidance and His faithfulness, and looking forward to kind of seeing where we go from here. So let me transition now. I appreciate you guys hearing that. And I guess if you could conclude anything from parts of my testimony, I'm a guy God called out. I checked a lot of worldly boxes. I was a good athlete. I was a good student. I was a nice guy. Most people like me. Made a lot of good choices. Made some bad ones too. But I checked a lot of boxes, and then God just said, "Man, it's not about that. It's about you putting me in the center." And I've been on this road for 20 plus years now. And I hope this will resonate. I think it will. As you grow in wisdom and maturity, which I have in a lot of ways, you just realize how much more there is to grow in wisdom and maturity. And so I can tell you guys, truthfully, I've grown a lot, but I'm seeing the road so clear, man. I've got thousands of miles to go. So I'm anxious to continue on that journey with God. So I want to step in to part 2 of this. Let me make sure. Okay, I'll hustle up. A guy once told me he'd never heard a bad short speech, and so I think that's good advice. So I'm gonna hustle up. So at least I'll check part of that box. About 2 years ago, I got exposed to some teaching from a guy. It's a long story. I'll spare you how it came to be, but I got exposed to a guy teaching about fear. And I'm pretty familiar with fear. I think we're all probably familiar with fear. It's a thing we've experienced and we've learned about and we've read scripture about. But he's some different teaching. He spent 40 years, he's now in his mid-60s. He spent 40 years in law enforcement and CIA work, primarily overseas. I love it. He said he was tasked by the CIA to build bridges and connections with adverse people group in the Middle East. ISIS, Hamas, like that. He's like, that was my job title. So this guy is speaking from a lens of living out his faith in this law enforcement CIA world. And so he does a bunch of speaking and teaching, and he's written a book on fear. Long story how I got exposed to it, but I'm listening to this initial teaching. And, he said, do you think it's coincidental that the single most stated phrase and instruction in the Bible is do not fear? Do not be afraid. He's like, do you think God just kind of lost track of how many times he threw that out there? Or do you think that was intentional? And I was like, nah, that makes sense. And so he began to reveal a couple of principles and misbeliefs, and I couldn't believe how true these were in my life. Couldn't believe how true. So he teaches that there are two misbeliefs that most of us have, especially Americans and probably American men. And again, I won't speak for everybody here, but this is absolutely true for me. He said the first misbelief that opens the door to fear in our lives is that we believe it's up to us. Okay, we believe it's up to us. I'll unpack that just a little bit. So we've been taught, and you guys think back to your childhood, 4-year-old soccer, second grade, junior high. Like, we've been taught by the world, and even by our families unintentionally, like, you want to be great, it's up to you. It's up to you. You got to make it happen. You got to navigate the road. You got to see what's coming. You got to be tough enough. Got to pull up your bootstraps. Got to get in there. And so we slowly believe this truth that it's up to us. And those of us of faith say, and this was how I was, like, well, I need God and I hope He helps me. So God help me. But look, guys, just being very candid, I mostly believe it's up to me because that's what I've been taught my whole life. So when you believe that, and the world shows you that you can fail, and the enemy reminds you that you have failed and that you will fail, that belief of it's up to us just opens this door to fear in our lives. And I just smiled. I was like, wow, how have I never heard this? And that's so true. And so then he shifted to this next principle. He said it this way: we don't fully trust God. And I've never heard it that way because I do trust God. I can stand up here before you guys and say, I trust God. I've trusted Him in numerous situations, and I've prayed and I've listened and I've responded. I genuinely trust God. But fully, I just knew. I knew how true that was in my life, and I'm just smiling like, wow. So here I am. I'm following this guy. I do believe that it's up to me, even though I hope God helps me, but at the end of the day, it's up to me to navigate it all. I do believe that, and I don't fully trust Him. And he began to encourage us to write down the fears in our lives. And I wrote down 7. Told my wife, told my business partner what was going on. They're like, what's wrong with you? Like, you're not fear driven. Like, what are you talking about? There's 2 people that know me better than him. I said, no, there's fears inside of me. I've just learned how to cope with them and manage them. And so I wrote those things down, and he said, hey, every fear you have in your life, just put it back through this litmus test. Just ask, is that fear driven because you believe it's up to you and you don't fully trust God? And I'm going to encourage you guys, again, if this resonates with you, I would strongly encourage you to assess some fears in your life. I'll tell you this as encouragement. I've had so many conversations with men in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s the last 18 to 20 months. And guys, I admire and revere. I haven't talked to one person who has not said, man, that's real. Like, I still struggle with this fear. Talked to a guy in his 70s, a guy that's mentored me in some ways, and I've admired him and his work and his family. We got to talking about this, and he said, man, that's crazy. He said, I just sold a deal. I've made more money than I've ever thought I'd make. And he said, every day I get up with a fear that people are going to realize I'm not what I look to be. Great guy, godly man, like Bible on his desk, genuine, real. Another friend of mine just said, man, had some stuff in my journey early on and fighting this fear of not belonging. Just not like fighting that fear. For me, I'll share this with you guys. The number one thing I wrote down is just a fear of not honoring and glorifying the kingdom. I mean, that's a good intention thing. That's the number one thing that stirs fear in me. I'm afraid I'm not going to honor and glorify the kingdom. Well, let me just help you guys with this. So guess what? Belief A, I kind of believe most of that's up to me. That's nerve-wracking, and that stirs fear. And in principle B, I don't fully trust that God's going to work it out to where my life actually honors Him. And so fear by fear for me, as I assessed those, it just became very clear, like I am what the teacher is explaining. So to move out of that, he said, and gosh, this was something. He said to move out of that, he said, you have to confess these things to the Lord. And he said, confession is such a churchy, religious word, but he said, you have to speak the truth to the Lord about these things. And once you speak that truth, these chains and walls will start to break down. And so I did. I had to tell God, all right, God, you already know this about me. You already know this. But I mostly believe it's up to you, up to me, excuse me. Even though you've showed me so much, I still somehow believe it's mostly up to me and I don't fully trust you. And in confessing that and speaking that truth to the Lord, like I legitimately just felt like walls breaking down and chains breaking. And it was like, I love what he said. God does not want to deal with the false version of ourselves. And so when we hold on to these misbeliefs and these false beliefs, like that's a part of just being false, and God is not interested in the false. He's interested in the broken, but definitely not the false. And so for him to be able to fully step in, like we have to speak the truth. I mean, can you guys imagine? Maybe you have, but like I've been pretty tied in on my faith, and I'm having to tell my Heavenly Father, like, man, sorry for everything you've showed me. I don't fully trust you. But that's the truth, and that's what he wants from us. So identifying these principles, speaking that truth, confessing that truth, and then lastly, and I'll kind of move toward the conclusion here, but I failed this test. He said, you have to start to understand what your unique identity is. If you're going to move out of fear, you have to understand that these two principles exist. You have to speak the truth to God and tell him actually how you feel, and then you have to understand your unique identity. Well, I've been in church a long time. I heard identity. I got that answer. You know what my identity is? I'm a Christ follower. Child of God, redeemed child of God, saved child of God, child of eternity, all the great church answers. And he's like, man, those are all good things, but that's not the right answer. It's not the right answer. He said, no, Psalm 139 says, each of us in this room is uniquely made, uniquely designed, uniquely crafted with this mix of traits and characteristics and spiritual gifts that no other person has. I don't know how many men are in this room, but every single one of us has a unique design. And I know that sounds churchy, and I've heard that 1,000 times, but like, being candid with you, like I didn't understand what that was for me. What actually makes me different than anybody else? What is it? What makes you guys different than any other person on this planet? And God created us that way so that we could use that gifting to serve the kingdom. And the more we live in that true identity, the less fear stirs. Most of us have been living in this lane of like what the world says we're supposed to be. Be a good man, be a godly man, raise a good family, build a good godly business and career. And so we just kind of follow and chase these general paths and never really tap into the uniqueness of who we are and how those gifts can serve the kingdom. So, to conclude on that teaching, it's been an incredible, impactful journey. And if you guys haven't, the guy I'm speaking about is this guy named Jamie Winship, and somebody, a few guys have heard of him, maybe some of you haven't. Happy to try to like make some connections and get some podcast out. But Jamie Winship's been such an impactful teacher, and I just want to encourage you guys. I think most of us in this room deal with fear. Maybe not all of us, but most of us. And walking through that assessment, walking through that confession and truth telling, and then connecting with God and starting to ask Him to reveal to you. And that's how you do it. You don't come up with what your identity is. It's God-given and God-revealed. And you got to go to Him and you got to get at His feet and you got to say, what is it about me, God? So I encourage you guys with that. I hope that'll be impactful. Thanks for the time. A little bit long. Appreciate you guys.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Marketplace Midland Podcast. Please join us next month with speaker Alan Peters.